So you ready to do it all over again? Springboks against the All Blacks with a great test last weekend, and they play again this weekend, and the teams are out. The Springboks and the All Blacks have named their teams for the weekend. So welcome back to the channel. That's what I'm going to be speaking about. Head to the comment section. That's where you can have your say about these teams. What do you make of it? The changes that have been made. How do you see the game going? And also, how big a game is this? I know South Africa, New Zealand, it's the biggest rivalry in the sport. It's got some of the best history, certainly the best quality. They're always massive games, but I just wonder for this match in particular. And All Blacks fans and Springbok fans, let me know there, because from my perspective, as an outsider, as a neutral observer, it's a big, big game coming up this weekend. And what I mean by that is, first of all, South Africa, it's been quite a few years since they won the Rugby Championship. They can take what you would expect will be a commanding lead if they were to win this weekend with games against Argentina to come. They also, though, haven't won what they call the Freedom Cup since 2010, which I know isn't the be-all and end-all, but it's the cup they get for kind of winning both games against, essentially against New Zealand in the Rugby Championship or Tri-Nations. They haven't won that since 2010, and it's against your biggest rivals. That's a long, long time. And actually, the last time, I had to check this, the last time the Springboks won both games against New Zealand in the Rugby Championship was, well, it wasn't even the Rugby Championship, Tri-Nations 2009. And I know these are all kind of little bits, little things, which in the grand scheme maybe don't seem a huge deal. But I just think given the rivalry, this South African team will want to tick that off, won't they? They've ticked off so many achievements over the last 5 years. 2 World Cups, a Lions tour, some massive victories and massive scalps. I'd have thought that is going to be something that Rassie Erasmus and those players are going to be quite motivated to try and achieve. So, yeah, let me know. But the teams are out. And the big thing I think we've seen this week is the impact that last week had. And that bruising test match that we all enjoyed. I hope we're going to get something similar this weekend, because usually the Springboks will name their team on a Tuesday. They've waited the couple of extra days this week. They've also made a number of changes, and New Zealand have made changes as well and have a couple of injuries to contend with. You know, when you get some of the highest quality test matches, there is normally repercussions after them. And I think we've seen that with the 2 team selections this week. So in terms of the Springboks, this is their team. 5 changes in total. You've got Etzebeth, Williams, Pollard and LaRue all starting, as well as a return for Kane Moody, which is great to see him back. Burst onto the scene kind of last year or last 18 months or so, has been injured. He returns to the fold as well for the Springboks. And it's funny actually, because when I look at Springbok team selections, I get fearful that I'm becoming just a bit of a broken record, because pretty much every team selection, there'll be a few changes. There'll be some younger players, for example, Grant Williams on this occasion, that are getting more experience, building that squad and building depth in the squad for the next World Cup. But also there's a huge amount of quality as well, and still loads of those players have won the World Cup. So again, we've got a team that is really experienced, but also have exciting young players involved, and also has a hell of a lot of power to make the difference in games, which was one of the differences. I think one of the big stories really from that victory last week was the differences in the benches, and I'm definitely going to come on to that when we chat about the All Blacks. But there is one thing in particular actually for the Boks, 5-3 bench split. Not something we see them do all that often. 6-2 is predominantly their preferred one. 7-1 on occasion, like a World Cup final. We'll chuck that in. But a 5-3 bench split, and I mentioned it just now, but the power game for the Boks, as it always is, was massive in the final 20 minutes last week. In terms of the power, they are not impossible, but they're almost impossible to live with when you compare their squad with other international teams. They blow people away in that final 20 minutes. So what's the reason for the 5-3 split? Because I think, again, we're going to see a top quality, incredibly bruising test match this weekend. I guess on the one hand, it's rotation. It gives players a chance. So we've got Hendrickse coming onto the bench to see him. Williams comes in. Pollard comes into the starting team. You've also got the return of Lukhanyo Am on the bench. So are there players that Rassie Erasmus wanted to get game time to? And so 5-3 bench split was the best way of doing that in terms of the backs. Obviously, Peter Steff, I think, would be the second row cover. I know he's starting, but he would shift into the second row with kind of a Quagga Smith or Elric Lowe coming into the back row. I also just wonder, in terms of that 5-3 bench, is it preparing for different scenarios as well? Over the last years, recent years really, the Springboks have been probably the best prepared team. They've been able to absorb blows and deal with it. And I think we will continue to see them be a 6-2 bench split team for the majority of the time. But a 5-3 for a game of this magnitude, I think, is players coming back and them wanting to give some game time to in terms of their backs replacements and also just preparing for different scenarios. Another challenge for this team to deal with. They have the luxury of having the advantage overall in the Rugby Championship. Having won last week, it maybe gives them some flexibility there. Final thing I wanted to mention for the Boks, I'm going to come on to the All Blacks. Eben Etzebeth is closing in. He's going to make his 126th Springbok appearance. Victor Matfield is the record holder on 127. There is a whole video in itself here, so I'm not going to go into it too much now because I think I'll do it when he breaks that record. Greatest Springbok ever? I know he's in the conversation. Like, where does he rank? South Africa fans, let me know. When I saw how close he was to that record, I just thought for a moment, there haven't been many better, have there? Let me know. Let's get on to the All Blacks, though. This is their team. Again, we got a number of changes. I'll come on to that in just a moment. The big headline from the All Blacks team selection is actually the bench, because what they've done is got TJ Perenara and Beauden Barrett amongst their replacements. And I've mentioned it already in this video, the bench was massive last week. New Zealand were leading that game. And all right, it wasn't purely down to the bench. There was ill discipline. There was the Simbin for Offa Tuangafasi as well. But I think the bench played a big part. And I think when you look back at the test matches against England earlier this year, where England were the team that were leading heading into the closing stages and New Zealand were the side that came back into it and won it, a lot of the time that was because of the impact of the New Zealand bench, in particular Beauden Barrett coming off it and the kind of impact he has. So I think they've gone for more experience on the bench, hoping to change that dynamic later on in the game. Going to be fascinating to see if it works. In terms of the team overall, I mentioned there were injuries. Blackadder and Clark both unavailable due to injury, which actually is a real blow to the All Blacks. I thought Blackadder was probably their standout player last week. Caleb Clark, over the last few years, there's been a lot of conversations about whether he should be in the team or not. Often he wasn't the most popular choice, but actually form-wise, he's been on really good form and again was impressive last week as well, I thought. So 2 big injuries, but it's 4 changes overall. Cortez Ratimer, Sevu Reece and Mark Talea come into the back line and Wallace Satiti comes into the back row. What an opportunity. An opportunity, I think, is the big thing here. As much as I talk about the experience on the bench and that being crucial, what an opportunity for Cortez Ratimer at scrum half. People have been calling out for him to start, myself included, for quite a while. So what does he look like? I think he's looked great coming off the bench in most of the test matches that we've seen so far in most of his appearances. What he's injected into the game has been brilliant. It is a different challenge to do that from the start. Is he able to? And then Satiti as well, as good as Blackadder has been, there are changes in that back row, aren't there? You feel like the 6th jersey is up for grabs. Sam Cane is still there as well for the time being, but you know he's not going to be around too much longer. So there will be changes in that All Blacks back row over the next few years. Wallace Satiti go into Cape Town and make an impact. And he has to make an impact as well, actually, as do all of those forwards. Physically, I thought New Zealand actually did pretty well against South Africa last week. On the whole, they lost it kind of later on, as I've mentioned already. But they have to front up again. It's an area of the game you cannot be off it even slightly. One other thing to mention, I suppose, from the All Blacks' point of view, and note I made, is obviously DMAC continuing at fly half. Will Jordan was on the wing last week. He shifted to fullback. How that axis works, because I suppose a big thing with McKenzie and Barrett when they're both on the pitch is you have 2 playmakers. You have 2 players that can play fly half to a really high level. With Will Jordan at fullback, it just changes the shape of your attack a little bit, I would imagine. So exactly how that works, I think, is going to be quite fascinating. And I hope it's going to be another great match. Both 2 very good teams. New Zealand needing to bounce back, something we have seen them do a lot in recent years, but can they do it to the world champions, the back-to-back world champions in South Africa? It's going to be fascinating. I should say as well, I know I mentioned earlier the fact that the Springboks haven't won back-to-back games in the Rugby Championship against New Zealand since 2009. I know they have won back-to-back games with the World Cup final, and last week I was just speaking specifically in terms of the Rugby Championship. So how do you see it going? Are the Boks going to make it 2 from 2 against the All Blacks? Are they going to erase some of those perhaps unwanted records that I mentioned a short while ago? Or are New Zealand going to bounce back? Can't wait for it this weekend. Have your say in the comments section. Look forward to reading it. And also, whilst you're here, like the video. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Would absolutely love it if I can earn your subscription and we can keep growing the channel. Appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next one.